welcome to Writing the Wrong Way, where we talk about how writing works, how writers work, and how the best writers risk being strange. And my guest today is Fell Hound. She's a really excellent writer and artist who has a book coming out, or a book that's out now, Commander Rao from Scout Comics. So we're going to dive right in. She's talking to Fell Hound about Commander Rao. Here with Fell Hound. And Fell, are you named? Did you name yourself after the Hell Hades enemy?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
No, there's a demon dog called the Fell Hound in I know in the Hell Hades game, and I'm not sure where else it might be from, but I'm curious to know more about the name Fell Hound, if you don't mind.
So Fell Hound actually is from a video game, but it's not from that one.
That's the wrong one. Which one?
There's a very old RPG called Planescape Torment.
Sure.
And there was like an extremely side character named Fell, and I don't remember what race of character they were, but the whole thing was that this race of character, they're supposed to fly, so they're always floating. But this person named Fell, they chose not to float, and they're always on the ground using their feet, and that's why they're called Fell. And I don't know why. I thought that was just neat. So I was like, oh, I guess that's a cool name. And then I was sorry?
I was say I know it from a different game where it's a variation of a hellhound. So it's a very different background there.
I think a hellhound is a lot cooler, but the hound part actually was totally unrelated. I was working on a biology project at the time. It was on like animal exercise, and I was doing a research project on hounds and dogs and how they move. And then I just kind of smashed the two together because I thought it sounded cool.
Yeah, well, not only does it sound cool, but I've got to say your book, Commander Rao, if you look at the cover of it, it has probably the best credits of any book. Hound squids. So great.
Yeah.
Squids, of course, being letter squids, your letter on this book. But you yourself are the writer and the artist, correct?
Yes.
Could you talk a bit about how you... So when we're talking here, it's a little bit before the book is coming out, but this podcast will publish when the book is out and people can buy it, from Scout Comics. You can buy from their comic store, order it however they like. Again, this Commander Rao, can you talk a bit about how you kind of devised this story and this comic, and then sort of your path to landing it with Scout Comics?
Yeah, so originally I decided to make like a Commander Rao because, to be honest, I just wanted to practice drawing fight scenes. I haven't really drawn that many comics before this one. Officially, this is probably my second comic. And before that, my last work, Do You Believe in an Afterlife? It was kind of like a low-key half comic, half prose kind of work that was very experimental. And I was just kind of looking at my portfolio and was like, okay, what's missing? And I was like, well, I haven't really drawn fight scenes before. So to me, Commander Rao was based upon just wanting to practice drawing movements and action and stuff like that. And then, initially to be honest, I was planning to release this comic for free. Like I was talking to my friend about it, and I was like, oh, it's just a practice comic. I think I'll just put it out there for free, and then hopefully you'll get attention and have some editors come look at it. And then my friend sat me down and was like, no, put it on Kickstarter, get some money for it. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, I do like money. So I decided to self-publish it on Kickstarter, and it ended up doing like a lot better than I thought it would. I think my last work, Do You Believe in Afterlife, at that point had sold maybe like 50 copies. So to get like 300 something backers on Commander Rao just like overshot my expectations. And from what people told me, they really liked it. They were really invested in the comic and they wanted more. So I was like, all right, I think that's kind of what gave me the extra confidence to try to pitch this book. And I had known some people who've worked with Scout before. I know some of the folks who like had books at Scout, and they all said like fairly good things about it. And I don't know. I just thought, okay, I guess I'll just, shoot my shots, pitch it to Scout, see what happens. And then I think a week later, I sent in the pitch. I got an email back being like, so is this still available? And I was like, yes.
So there's a bunch of things that are interesting in that path to me. So I just want to kind of dive into a few specific ones. So one is simply, so just to kind of jump in the middle of it a little bit, when you did the book on Kickstarter. So one of the things that you as you said, you did the book did quite well. It doubled or tripled its original ask, and I'm curious to know why you think that happened. What do you think resonated in the book with people?
That's a great question. From what people have told me, before I did release the book on Kickstarter, I was sharing kind of snippets of the character design and some of the pages. And I think that's what kind of gained some traction. I had a lot of people telling me that they thought the character looked really cool. And I think I just had some really good friends who, they were invested in my work and invested in the character I was making, and they really helped to push the book, especially at launch. I also got some, I guess, comments on the cover. People said the cover looked really cool and they wanted to check it out. So I guess that was kind of another point on how it got people's attention. But I think it was mostly to do with just the friends I had, who were very, very good and very helpful. I had a lot of friends teaching me how to use Kickstarter and like how to promote one, and just people being really nice and helping me push the book.
And just to sort of pick into two things there, could you talk more about the character design for Commander Rao, like sort of how you developed that character design?
Yeah, absolutely. So before I actually had the character Commander Rao, like a couple of years ago, I was sketching in my sketchbook, and I was in like a phase where I drew like a lot of sci-fi soldiers. So I designed and drew a bunch of like sci-fi looking soldiers. And at that time, I was also really into an anime called Rose of Versailles. It's a pretty old anime, but there's this character called Lady Oscar who is super awesome. They're like this badass sword lady, and I was really in love with just the character designs in that book, kind of like the old fashioned, like 17th century kind of look. And I was just kind of looking at that kind of art style and the soldiers I was sketching, and I thought it'd be kind of cool to kind of blend the two designs together to have something sci-fi and futuristic, but still kind of old-fashioned looking, like an old-fashioned general. And at that time, I was also really into Lady Maria from Bloodborne. Like, I looked at her character design, and I was like just reading up on Bloodborne lore, and I thought she was so cool. I think her character design is so well done, and like just everything about her the way she was presented. Like, I mean, she's only like a 4-minute fight scene in this giant game, but yet she's one of the most popular characters. So I was actually kind of studying that and thinking about, why is this character who's only there for like 4 minutes one of the most popular characters in this, like, I don't know, 30-50 hour game. And I think it had a lot to do with A, her character design, B, her presentation, like just the way that, her fight scenes were handled, the way she kind of spoke, and just general execution and atmosphere of the character. And I think that's kind of what inspired Commander Rao. I wanted Commander Rao to have that very similar, intriguing aura as Lady Maria from Bloodborne. So I wanted her to have like a very cool character design. I wanted her to look a little bit mysterious, and I just wanted her to just, when the moment she comes on, she feels like this iconic character that's already kind of lived in this world. So those are probably my biggest inspirations for the character and the design of Commander Rao.
That's a mistake that I see a lot of writers making, is that they won't have mystery to the character, and a lot of writers I see will come in and they won't do what you did, which is that they'll like, as the character is on screen for the first time, or in the page one or whatever, they have like, here's 100,000 words about this character's backstory, and as you're meeting the character, you know,
Yeah.
and it's like there's no mystery, there's nothing, there's no gap, you know, that the audience can fill. They're not wondering things. And you know, there's a
Mhm.
level at which of course an audience doesn't want to wonder forever, perhaps, but like that idea of having a person fully formed where you like you get a sense that, as you say, they've lived in this world for some time and we're going to catch up, they know more than us. Like there's a level at which that tends to work well in terms of creating those iconic characters, like you say, because there's
Mhm.
just so much that the audience can do with them and think about them.
Yeah.
Like they have to think about them, you know what I mean? Like whereas a different character who just gets introed in a way where now here's a bunch of information about this person, and well, what, we don't need to think about them anymore, right?
Yeah,
uh,
exactly.
so it's curious, especially you bring up Bloodborne. It's a game that I'm also kind of I've gotten very fascinated by Bloodborne, although I can't say I played it much because every time I start playing it I feel like this is going to eat 200 hours of my life and I don't know if I can spend that right now. But
Yeah.
it's so fascinating. Even just every little snippet I learn about it has so much behind it, you know, in that way.
Absolutely. And I'll be completely honest, I've never played it because I'm very bad at Dark Souls type games. Like, I don't think I've gotten past 30 minutes of Dark Souls, but
Same here, yeah. Although I'm obsessed
yeah.
with it. I just bought a big hardcover Dark Souls book,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, I'm
But
the same
it's
way. Like, the
mhm.
design of the world is so good that you just fall in love with it, even though even though you've never played it, it's still just so captivating.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not good at video games. I do a lot of work with the video game companies and stuff. I'm not good at the games, and so but I just find them so interesting and fascinating. But that sort of storytelling structure where it is also a comic structure, like, you know, where there's so much in the gutter that's happening, you know.
Yeah.
And a lot of writers I find just will forget that. They'll forget that you can leave things in the gutter, you know, and there's like a way in which the audience filling it in, as long as they're not lost completely, or
Yeah.
they, and it does go somewhere, like they kind of will get it. Like they're trained to read that way.
Hmm.
um, I wonder if you could also talk about the cover designs, because you mentioned, you know, the character design and the cover design, they kind of go hand in hand in the sense that the character's on the
Yeah.
cover, but also um, I'm curious to know from your perspective as an artist and also putting this book together, what you think goes into a good cover. Like what makes for a good cover design, or what are the kinds of things you try to do or look for in a strong cover design?
Yeah, so for the Commander Rao cover in particular, I was actually very inspired by the works of J.H. Williams, who drew the Batwoman books and recently drew Echolands. And he has like such an almost like abstract, surreal way of doing his cover works, but it's so good. I think I actually have one of them here. I'm just going to
He's
pull it
the one
up.
that did that Sandman, right? The recent,
Yeah, Sandman
that
Overture.
that really crazily paneled one.
Probably. That sounds like him.
Overture, yes, you're right. That's the one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a fascinating artist. Yeah, very mathematical, it seems, in terms of the uh, layouts. I'm not sure, but
Mm,
they're very ornate.
yeah, like I think he actually said at one point that he doesn't actually like plan out the layouts. He just draws and just makes it up as he goes
Oh,
along,
wow.
which is incredible. But I guess in terms of a good cover, I think with Commander Rao in particular, I wanted something that was high contrast, something that was laid out a little different than other covers with like a heavy use of shapes and silhouettes, which is something I love, and just something very dynamic that told the story in the cover itself. Um, but yeah, I think mostly I looked at J.H. Williams' work and I was like, I wish I could do something this cool. And then I just looked at what he did, and he uses a lot of like shapes and contrast. It's like, okay, let me try doing that.
What's your actual background as an artist and a writer? Like, where do you come from in that sense?
So I don't really have a lot of formal training. I was mostly self-taught. Like I think in college, I picked up Batwoman elegy drawn by J.H. Williams, and I was like, this looks so cool. I want to do this. And then I just kind of slowly taught myself to draw. I was writing a lot more than I was drawing. Like in high school, I'd write short stories and some really bad poetry, but it never really I never really got serious about it until after college, and I was like, comics are cool. I want to make comics.
What made you get serious about comics though? Because a lot of people think comics are cool. A lot of people want to make comics, but very few people actually will do that. In fact, you'll talk to people, I'm sure. I've seen people do this. Someone was telling me the other day, my friend Zach Schuster was saying the other day, he remembers being at a con and somebody came up to him and was like, I don't know, I would do anything to do what you guys are doing and make comics. And Zach's like, well, you should just start with drawing for 5 minutes a day. And the guy's like, well, I could never do that. Like a lot of people they have this idea, but they don't really follow through on it. I'm just curious. I'm always curious to know what separates people who follow through.
Yeah, so as I said, I was a bigger writer than I was an artist back then, and I've always had a love of storytelling. And I don't know why, but I also found writing to be very hard for me, which is why, even in works like Commander Rao, there's not really a lot of dialogue. It's mostly just visual storytelling. But yeah, I don't know why, but when I was in college, I somehow thought that if I had pictures to help tell the story along with the words, then it would make writing a lot easier. And so that was really how I started drawing. And also the fact that, I really liked comics, but I, as a broke college student, I couldn't really afford an artist. So I was like, okay, I could either spend the next 4 years trying to save up and afford an artist, or I can spend the next 4 years just teaching myself how to draw. And I just decided to teach myself how to draw.
No, it's always interesting, like how people come at it. And I'm curious to know as well. Well, you mentioned visual storytelling. A lot of this story is told through the visuals. There are some words in here, of course, but it's not very word-heavy comic. Although I will note that it's a very sound effects heavy comic. It's very interesting how many and how complicated some of the sound effects are. I'm curious to know, is that all letter squids, or are you, or to what degree were you orchestrating these sound effects as a writer?
So yeah, I'd say like 99% of the sound effects were all letter squids. Like I think when it comes to letters, I'm pretty easygoing with how they want to work. And with letter squids, he likes to make up his own sound effects. He likes to, make up sounds that work for him. And letter squids, he's a very dynamic and bold letterer, which is something that I do love. So I just kind of, when I gave him the script, I had like actually not that much SFX in it. And he just kind of did his own thing. And I was like, great. So yeah, it was all squids pretty much.
You also opened the comic with a fake newspaper page, and I've seen that in a number of people have done that. Of course, the most famously, Alan Moore did in Watchmen. Not because they're opening so much, but he did that kind of thing consistently. I'm curious to know why you decided to open with that, because a lot of people shy away from like a first page that has a lot of text on it.
Yeah.
Especially in a comic that really doesn't have a lot of text. I'm curious to know like where you kind of came up with the idea to make that the first page.
So that was actually a late addition. Initially, the comic did not have that page initially, but when I was kind of going through the comic without that page, I felt like there was just no context to anything Commander Rao was doing. Like we didn't have the background on, why what she was doing mattered. And at that point, to be honest, it was kind of a lazy way out. I didn't want to like add more pages of lore and exposition to the comic and draw like an extra 30 pages just explaining all the background stuff. So I decided to just have a newspaper page that kind of, laid out the scene for everyone. I bolded the important sections, so if you didn't want to read it all, just read the bolded parts and move on. But yeah, it was just kind of like my quick way to introduce people to the world, and I figured I could hopefully get away with it because the rest of the comic doesn't have a lot of dialogue in it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because in some ways it kind of frees you up from having to have that dialogue later on, and as you say, it is a skippable thing in the sense that probably people should read it, but if they want to just forget about the context and get right to the action, it does allow that option too, rather than having to spread the exposition out in the kind of a more normal way.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
I'm normally not a big fan of like a too heavy exposition, but when you have a comic that's only 30 pages long, that's 90% fight scenes, it's like I don't know where else to put this. So that was kind of like my quick band-aid fix on just laying the scene and then moving on with all the cool fight stuff I wanted to do.
Now, when you were developing this, you say you had done a book where it was kind of more heavily prose mixed with illustration prior to this. And I'm curious to know, like, when you did that particular book, how did you find people received that book? Because I've seen a few examples of that, that and overall I find it really interesting. But I don't see too many people doing it. And I also am always interested and curious to know how audiences sort of seem to respond to that approach. It's not really what you're doing, Commander Rao, but I'm curious to know a bit more about that earlier project and how you felt it went.
Yeah, so personally for me, I decided to go with the half comics and half prose because at that point I hadn't really done comics in a while, and I was trying to get slowly back into sequential art, and I was still kind of figuring things out, and I realized I didn't want to like cripple myself with a very long project. So having just the prose bits in between allowed me to tell a story without, drawing 100 pages of art that I wasn't, comfortable drawing at the time. But I think just because of the way I promoted it, like I told everybody, instead of calling it just a comic, I called it like a comic zine. So they were expecting more of like an experimental approach to it. And not gonna lie, I think most people who brought Do You Believe in an Afterlife were my friends. So might be a little biased, but they seem to enjoy it. So I think as long as you're kind of upfront with what you're offering and like, yeah, the work you do is of some quality, I think people generally don't mind a more experimental approach to things.
What
Yeah.
I've found is, I'm not a person who does any sort of drawing. So like I've written comics, but my artist GMB Kamichik is the artist that I've worked with the most. We've got a book coming out of heavy metal called The Eye Collector, and it's like this kind of weird surreal horror comic. But what I've noticed, before that, I've been very much just publishing, words on a page, no visual stuff. What I've noticed is the big difference is that if there's some visuals in there, it's easier to convince people to just look at it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like I grew very jealous of my comics friends and my artist friends. And one reason I kind of started to move into comics was honestly, I just was like, it's so much harder to get people to read these words when there's no pictures around. Because if they like the pictures, then they'll start looking. They can look at the pictures and within 1 second, they know if they like it.
Yeah.
And they know if they want more, and I would see Gregory at, conventions, and people would walk past his table, and either they'd just walk past or they'd stop. And because they just see the image and they want to see more or they don't. And I was very jealous of that ability that artists have, because I was like, all these words on the page, they look exactly the same until you start to pay attention and read them. And it just is so much upfront investment to ask of a reader in a weird sort of way. Like to even decide if they like you, they've got to spend like half an hour.
Yeah, it's like, as I said, I was a writer before I was drawing, and I definitely feel those pains. It was very hard to get anybody to read a short story or even a script if I didn't have like some kind of art to it. Or they say like, yeah, I'll totally read it, and then 3 months later you check in and it was like, so any progress? And they're like, oh, we forgot. But
yeah, there's the curse of it on the other side. It's so much harder to make art, honestly. Like it takes so much more time. You take maybe a page might take you, I don't know, 8 hours to draw versus 10 minutes to write. But somebody's going to look at it for 2 seconds versus like read it for 10 minutes. And so there's like this flip side of it too. But I feel like it's just something that I've I've noticed like the ask is so much, the ask of the audience seems so much smaller if there's visual elements in there, even though maybe the work is more on your end in some respects. I think it's very interesting to me, like just kind of looking at that dynamic. And so when you bring Kickstarter into it, for example, I feel like, I've seen it's comics tend to do much better than prose works on Kickstarter for, I think, a lot of reasonable reasons. But of course, not everything succeeds on Kickstarter or even, does super well or anything.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know, like, I think a lot of people and a lot of students I talk to, especially, will have that impulse that you say you first had, which is, well, I'll just give things away for free. And I feel like that actually was a winning strategy at one point in history, and now it's not. Because I feel like we've been so inundated now with things for free. What I've noticed is that people don't want them. They'd rather pay you money, because at least that, and if they pay you money, they actually are more invested. They actually might read it, as opposed to just click, download. Now it's mine, but it doesn't occupy any headspace. I found that with teaching, even when I used to give a lot of free advice to people, and then I noticed that when I charged them for the advice, they would actually take it. It's in a weird sort of way, like it was better for them if I charged them money. Could you talk a bit more about getting over that hurdle of like, oh, I should ask for money for this thing? Because I feel like it's a psychic hurdle a lot of people have. I've seen it in, punk shows. They don't want to ask for money. Artists aren't comfortable quoting a rate. Writers who, always undercut one another with quoting rates. Like, I just noticed a lot of hesitancy, and I understand the hesitancy. And I'm curious to know, like, for yourself, like, how did you kind of get over that, that kind of mental obstacle of like, oh no, I should ask for money for this?
Yeah, I guess imposter syndrome was kind of a big part of it, because as I said, Commander Rao was only kind of officially my second comic, and I was just going to give it away for free because I felt like nobody knew who I was and nobody knew my work, and that it would be really hard to get like an audience to pay for my stuff if they didn't know who I was. And I thought maybe if I gave it out for free, it would just be like, attention, a way to build an audience. But the way Kickstarter works is that I think there is a very active comics community on Kickstarter who are open to checking out new works from new writers. And just talking with my friend, he was, he's had some books on Kickstarter before, and he was like all for it. He says, you're not really gaining a whole lot by just giving things out for free. Like, why would you do that when you can at least get some money and build an audience at the same time, rather than just build an audience that you don't even know if they're going to show up or not? So I think that was kind of just talking with him, just kind of changed my view on things. And I was like, I think putting it on Kickstarter, which is a platform that a lot of people in the comics community use and that they check out on a regular basis, that might actually help me build even bigger audience than just giving it out for free. And I think in some ways it did work to that advantage, because there were a lot of people who backed the book who I had no idea who they were. And I think that just slowly helps you build an audience on Kickstarter, so that if you wanted to kickstart something in the future, you can just, try to rein that audience back in. But yeah.
I think the other thing that people often overlook is that even if you have a smaller audience than you would, say, giving a thing away for free, it is an audience of people who are willing to support you, as opposed to just people who are there and want something. Like, there's a bit more of a back and forth to that audience, and not that, it's bad to give things out for free or anything, but even like, I feel like that kind of Kickstarter audience, or that kind of audience you develop where you're kind of have a back and forth with the audience. It's like, they're paying to support you, you're working hard to make something for them, or, or like, that's an audience that maybe down the line, it makes more sense to give to something free to them. which I like. This is the thing I like about the Kickstarter stretch goals, this whole idea that now everyone's getting some, better thing
Yeah.
because there's a community that's built around it, say. I'm not averse to giving things out for free in any way, but I do find like it's just a different audience, and
Yeah.
whatever audience you want, I guess, is the question. What audience are you after? I think
Mhm.
sometimes people don't think about that audience. So I'm curious to know, just to kind of skip ahead to something here. Now moving with Scout Comics,
Yeah.
so there's a different publishing path, a different sort of way of connecting to an audience, putting somebody else now in between you and the audience to a certain degree. Like you already had like Kickstarter there, and now like Scout is there as well. I'm curious to know like what if you could talk more about why why you wanted to find a publisher like Scout, and two, what was there any sort of hurdle that you had to overcome or any issue that they had with the fact that you'd already published the comic yourself?
Yeah, so the thing with Scout is that they're very open to picking up Kickstarter comics. A lot of comics on their slate were previously kickstarted, like White Ash by Charlie
Mm.
Stickney. He's one of the co-publishers at Scout, but he still uses Kickstarter all the time. Same with their other co-publisher, David Byrne. I think his book Stake was also put on Kickstarter and then just released through Scout. So the reason why I went to them first and foremost was because I knew they would be comfortable putting out a book that was already out on Kickstarter. And they are very open to the idea that Kickstarter and the direct market are ultimately two different audiences. But for me going from the Kickstarter route to Scout with publishing, I think it was just a way to get more of an audience, and B, I think there are some advantages to having a publisher that I don't have myself. Like I don't have a list of like 400 shops that I could send the book to, and even if I did, like I don't know how to send out books to 400 shops all by myself. So having just like distribution and a network, I think, are pretty good things. um, I am learning a lot of stuff about the direct market. I think generally things are a lot slower, obviously, than if you were doing everything yourself on a small scale. But at the end of the day, I think it's pros and cons. I think it's important to find a publisher who aren't, you know, after all of your rights. Like you still
Mm-hmm.
want to have some ownership of your work, and that's another reason why I went with Scout, because I know they don't take IP ownership. Um, and from what I've heard about Scout, they're pretty easygoing with your work. Like they don't demand too many changes to it. They're just kind of, if they like your stuff, then they'll just put it out. And for me as a creator, I enjoy that freedom, and I was really grateful for it. But yeah, I think ultimately it's just a good way to learn a new path on how to get an audience, a new way to learn how to promote your books, and just testing the waters, seeing which one I would maybe prefer in the future, if I prefer to keep self-publishing it or if I prefer working in the direct market, stuff like that.
And how are you doing Commander Rao with them? Are you doing is it now the first issue of a series? Like how are you actually moving forward with that character in that book?
Yeah, so right now it's just the one shot that I've pitched that they've agreed to publish. I am working on some other books within the Rowverse that aren't necessarily about the Commander character, and I think I've just been slowly trying to figure out what I want to do with the character. The thing is that when I released Commander Rao, as I said, I mostly made it to practice fight scenes, and I did not anticipate it actually doing as well as it did. And when people started asking like if I was gonna have more Commander Rao, I was like, yeah, sure. But the thing about me is that I take a very long time to build a story. And so, I want to make sure if I do have more Commander Rao books, I do it right and don't just like push something out because people wanted it. So yeah, between working on some other stories in the Rowverse that focus on some other characters, I'm figuring out what to do with the commander character next and making sure I don't screw that up. But yeah, but right now it's just the one shot that's being released, and hopefully we'll see how well it does. And if it does well, hopefully we can have more Rao books in the future.
And how do you find working on a book like this versus working like as the writer and artist? How do you approach it differently than when you are, just working as an artist for somebody?
Yeah, so I think when I am working as just an artist, to be completely honest, I find the process more streamlined because it's like here's a writer, here's their script, and you just kind of work with that and work with them, and then you send it off to the letterer. Um, with me, I'm a little more chaotic. With Commander Rao, I didn't even have a script before I started drawing it. I literally like drew some thumbnails, had like some very basic dialogue down, and then I just went ahead and drew the comic. And then after I drew the comic, I went back and wrote in most of the script and the dialogue, and that's how stuff like the first newspaper page came into play. Because when I was writing the script, I was like, oh, there are things I need to explain. I'll just add this other page. But as I said, I think it's very much a learning curve for me still, trying to write and draw and have everything streamlined. With my next works coming up, I've decided to hire an editor to help keep me in line and make sure I don't cause further chaos for the letterers and other people involved by having such a chaotic process. But yeah, generally, I think when it comes to drawing and writing everything myself, I don't think as hard about the process, and I just kind of go with the flow, which is both good and bad.
Sure. And are you interested in writing for another artist? Is that something you've kind of been curious about at all? Because you mentioned initially you were sort of getting into art in some ways to avoid that.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to know, like, if that's something that is kind of on your radar as a thing you want to do or not.
At some point, I think it would be cool. I've written some short comic scripts. Like at the end of Commander Rao, there's I actually, as one of the stretch goals, it was a bonus comic written by me and drawn by Jeremy Simser, who's
Hmm.
like a storyboard artist for like a bunch of Marvel movies and Game of Thrones and stuff like that. So that was really fun, being on the other side of it and being able to receive somebody else's art of my writing. Um, and I think at some point I might consider doing more writing stuff, but I think I also like having some of the creative control when it comes to drawing my own things. And also, it costs a lot of money to hire artists, which, to be honest, is my biggest, I guess, setback into moving towards just a writing role.
Yeah, it's definitely the biggest problem with that process. I mean, that's what I'm doing, and I'll tell you, it's not easy. It can
Yeah.
get costly very fast, especially if doing a 100-page comic or something.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also just curious to know, coming out of the Kickstarter that you did, although it did very well, I'm curious to know what you would do differently next time.
That's a very good question. I think generally I would do more press release to actually like comic sites, and maybe do more stuff like podcasts and interviews and stuff like that. Because with Commander Rao, I didn't put out a press release. I didn't do any kind of interviews or anything. I just kind of put it out there, and then if people approached me who want to talk about the book, I was like, sure. But I didn't have any kind of official marketing or PR setup. And I think that's something I would like to do more in the future, especially now that I have a little bit more connections. If I have something coming out through a publisher, they might actually look at my press release this time. And I think just just trying to get that sort of almost official outreach through more sites is something that I want to change. And yeah, I don't know. I think with last time when I kickstarted Commander Rao, I made use of a lot of humor and memes to kickstart the book, which people responded well to. So if people enjoy that stuff, I might just do more of it.
And do you have any other plans to do another Kickstarter at this point, or?
I do, yeah. I have one slated, hopefully early 2022, which is for another story in the Raoverse, but it focuses on the character of Julie instead. So one of the, not Commander Rao herself, but one of the side characters, and we're gonna, learn more about her and why she was so important to the person who eventually became Commander Rao. So that's for early 2022. And then when I do make more Rao books, I'll probably still put them on Kickstarter first, just because I think it's kind of cool to have, retain that Kickstarter audience as best you can. Like a lot of my friends, they don't really go to comic shops, unfortunately, but they will like back stuff on Kickstarter. So I think I did enjoy using Kickstarter, and I like having kind of that creative control over some aspects of printing and distribution. So I think it is something that I would do more of in the future.
I won't take too much more of your time before I let you go, but I want to ask you, why is this book important to you?
That's a great question. Well, I think ultimately, I think I was just very endeared by the amount of support it got, like as something that I just created. I think when I first made Commander Rao, I didn't have that big of an audience, and I didn't really have that many people who knew who I was or were invested in my work. And making Commander Rao and seeing all that support from people, like the people who backed the Kickstarter, people who voted for me in the Sequential Magazine Awards, or like just people who were just retweet or commented or liked my work. I think a lot of that was very it kind of opened my eyes to see how people responded to it. And I think it was the first kind of book that made me feel like I was a part of the community, and that tore away at some of my imposter syndrome, and was like a very reassuring notion that I could become a comics artist, I could become a comics writer. And ultimately, I think that's what I'm most grateful for with the release of Commander Rao. It was just that community support that I experienced, and that have helped me, get this far into the comics realm. And I honestly think that's probably the most important part of the book that's happened so far. I mean, I do love the character and the story itself, don't get me wrong, but it wouldn't have gone anywhere if it weren't for those people who rooted for me.
And if people want to kind of join that community a bit and get connected with you online, like where's the best place for them to kind of find your work, or just find out more about you, or just, get in your face a little bit?
Yeah. So I'm most active on Twitter. You can find me at Fell Hound _. I'm also on Instagram, I think at fell.hound. I think if you Google Fell Hound art, hopefully everything should come up. But yeah, I think, if the best place if you want to chill and hang out and talk is probably Twitter. I'm pretty active there. I like to check out, new works from new creators and all that. So yeah, Twitter and Instagram. I also have a Gumroad for some of my self-published stuff. So if you want to check out stuff like Do You Believe in an Afterlife, I believe that's gumroad.com/fellhound.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for talking to me. And all those links, of course, we'll also put in the show description here. If you want to just click through and check out more from Fell. And yeah, thanks for chatting with me, and congratulations on Commander Rao. I hope it does really well, and I hope you listening go check it out from Scout Comics.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a blast talking with you. And yeah, hopefully I've convinced you to pick up Commander Rao, and if not, hopefully you can check out some of my future work.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much. Have a great day.
Take care. Bye. You too.